Welcome. I'm Kristen Harcourt, Senior Consultant with the McQuaig Institute, and this is our first Twitter chat. Welcome to my chat. I am excited to have our first guest, leadership expert, consultant, speaker, Mark Crowley. Mark Crowley has written numerous articles for Fast Company, Huffington Post, and many other publications as well, and he's the author of Lead from the Heart. So excited to have this conversation with you today, Mark, and welcome to my chat.
Thank you, Kristen. It's a huge honor for me to be here today, so thank you very much for the invitation. I love being the first one. I love being the first one that you've done. This is great.
So I know, Mark, when you and I first started talking, I said to you that I'm so passionate and so enthusiastic about what you're bringing to leadership and how you're approaching it from a different standpoint. And honestly, I could talk with you for hours, and I think our audience is going to be really interested and engaged with what you have to say. But we're going to limit this to 20 to 25 minutes. And after we have this conversation, if everyone wants to join us on Twitter, we're going to spend 30 minutes with a live Twitter chat, and Mark will be joining us there as well. So let's get right into the questions. I mean, one of the things that everyone realizes that's involved in talent management is that engagement is at an all-time low. A lot of companies are approaching this issue, I would say, and you would say as well, from the wrong lens. So in terms of your experience, Mark, and specifically around leadership, I'd love to hear, first of all, why do you think there's a disconnection, and why did you get involved in the work you're doing around leadership, and where does that passion come from?
Well, that's a very big question, actually, and so let me just sort of think about how to start. I suppose the best place to start, Kristen, is to just give you a quick summary of how I came to understand that there's a much better way of managing and leading people than we ever imagined. And the funny thing about it, the ironic thing is, everything that I'm going to say is completely inconsistent with what we've always believed. So the very solution to our engagement problem is what we thought would cause it. That's my experience. So I wrote about this extensively in my book, and I'll give you the very quick synopsis, but I'm hoping enough that everyone can just get an understanding of, okay, now I understand how he pivoted. I grew up, my mother died when I was very young, and I was raised by a psychologically abusive father. There's no way that I could describe it to you in the time that we have to describe the kind of pain, but I will tell you that he was sort of a fundamentally evil person whose real motivation was to destroy my human spirit. He wanted to ensure that I would not succeed in my life, and made sure that I believed what he believed was that I would never amount to anything in my life. And so I grew up with this, constantly hearing this. And then right when I was getting ready to go to college, my father, ironically, was a very successful business person and was a very wealthy man. And so I expected that he would sponsor me in going to college, and that did not happen. Instead, he kicked me out of the house with no financial support, no emotional support, no psychological support. It was, he never said, hey, come on over on Sundays, we're still your parents. He remarried, and there was just no connection. From that moment on, right after high school graduation, I was on my own. And I had a very, very difficult time getting through college. Just trying to survive and trying to go to school and trying to do well was a very difficult time in my life. And as I got to the end of that, Kristen, I started to fantasize about, man, how much more successful could I have been in my life up till this point had I had more encouragement, more support, more thoughtful direction, more validation and approval for the things that I was accomplishing. All of that, right? I mean, I took classes in college that didn't add up. I took classes that didn't matter from my major, and you realize you're making mistakes. And if you had somebody in your life that could have really helped you accelerate your growth, how much more potential of mine could have been actualized. So on an unconscious basis at first, but then later in my career, a very conscious decision was to give everyone who worked for me everything that I always wanted and believed would have made me thrive. So I taught people everything that I knew, and I came from an abundance mentality which said, the more I do for you, the better my success as a leader is going to be. And I encouraged people, and I told them directly that I believed in them. I never let them go home on a Friday in doubt about their relationship with me and how much I valued them. And so much more of that really defines, what I call leading from the heart. And what was amazing to me was that I did this thinking, this is what I always needed, and what would happen to people if I gave them those things. And what I saw was that every team I managed through the successive years of my career were amazing. I mean, we were always the best. We were always incredible, and people beat a path to work for me. I built this reputation of developing people and giving people all the very things that they needed in order to succeed in business. And so from there, I ended up, really mastering this and really testing it and understanding what are the practices that get people this charged up, this loyal, this deeply engaged, this highly productive. And so I had an opportunity when the organization that I was working for ended up being sold, and I made the decision that I was not going to stay with the new organization for very long. And at that moment, I chose to write this book. And I thought, I'm going to teach everyone the practices that I learned, that if you implemented them together, you could get extraordinary engagement, productivity, all the great things that leaders want. And I was about a year into the process, Kristen, when somebody said to me, close to me, they said, you're going to have to explain why these practices work. Because otherwise people are going to think, and pardon me for saying this, but this was his language. He said, otherwise people are going to think you need a shitty childhood in order to manage this way. And it hit me that I hadn't given it a moment of thought. I just took it on faith that, people would see this and they would believe me, but I realized that he was right. And so what I ended up doing was first step was to think about, well, what was I doing? What was this effect inside of people that made them so consistently loyal and productive and engaged? And recognizing that through the course of my career, I managed people in every possible role in financial services and banking. And so it didn't matter what job it was a human response to this. And I realized that I was affecting the hearts in people. And that may sound like an epiphany, and it was, but I got immediately depressed. Because in business, seriously, I'm not kidding. I really thought I've wasted a year of my life. No one's going to buy a book called Lead from the Heart or anything with the word heart, because we think the heart is soft and weak and sentimental and undermines leaders' productivity. We think whoever would say lead from the heart doesn't get business, right? This is how we think in business. And I thought about the people that I used to work with, particularly the most senior part of the organization. And I thought, they're not going to take this seriously, so who would? So I started looking for as much evidence as I possibly could, and I spent nearly a year and a half going out and finding all the supportive evidence to validate what I already knew to be true from my own direct experience. But most profoundly, what I discovered is in meeting with a world-class cardiologist, a heart surgeon, that we now know that the heart has its own form of intelligence, and that feelings and emotions drive human behavior. They drive what we care about, what we commit ourselves to. And so the very things that I gave people in response to this awful growing up experience of mine are the very things that human beings need on a steady basis, positive feelings and emotions. We are designed to thrive on those. And so I feel much more comfortable saying lead from the heart, Kristen, because I'm really doing exactly that. And I'm affecting the hearts in people. And when we do that, we're going to get extraordinary performance out of people.
Yeah, and I love when you started to talk about that in terms of the heart and that connection, and you coined the term emotional currency. Talk to us a little bit more about what does that emotional currency look like? How does that translate in organizations? Because one of the things we've talked about as well is it's not that when you're outside of work that you require the human connection. You need all of those aspects to feel like a whole person, and then all of a sudden you go into the workplace, you just leave that stuff behind and no longer need that human connection. So that emotional currency is really critical for employees to have that level of engagement. And then also, like you've mentioned, so that they feel empowered and really want to bring the best that they have to offer to the workplace. So talk to me a little bit more about what that emotional currency looks like.
So historically, people went to work for pay. We have basic needs for food, shelter, and we went to work to get pay so that we could meet those needs. So go back 100 years ago in the Industrial Revolution, that was the exchange. People got pay, and they got more pay if they did good work, and if they didn't do good work, they wouldn't keep their job. That was the way we dealt with work. But now what we're finding is, and what I know for certain, is that we human beings have ascended in our needs. We want much more than just a paycheck for work. Now, that's not to say, and people have, we've had some challenging tweet exchanges with some people saying, oh no, we're not paying people fairly in a lot of cases, which is indeed true. But once people negotiate their best pay package, we now know that pay no longer stands up as a day-to-day motor of people's engagement. In fact, across the world, the Conference Board found that there isn't a country in 140 plus countries that they've studied where pay ranks any higher than fifth of importance to people as a day-to-day motivator. So that's where this idea of emotional currency came from, taking my idea about the heart and emotion, feelings and emotions, and recognizing that if you pay people by giving them a caring and supportive boss, by developing them, by encouraging them, by running these things on a consistent basis, that is what will enable people to thrive in their jobs and give their greatest levels of commitment and productivity to the work on a very consistent basis.
Yeah, makes so much sense. So Mark, people are always going to ask when we think about this type of leadership style, which is, it's going to be different. It's taking a different stance around leadership. Talk to me about some of the organizations that are using this type of leadership style and really seeing success from it.
It's interesting because I really do believe there's, I'm writing articles fairly regularly, and I'm putting out work that I think is accessing some of these companies, and two that are probably the most remarkable. One is an organization called SAS. It's a software analytics firm in Cary, North Carolina. They've been around for about 40 years. And this is an organization whose CEO, Dr. Jim Goodnight, who I've actually met and interviewed, he started his company based on these values, and the perks that we know. Google is another one of these organizations, and Google gets a lot of recognition for all these perks, and a lot of people think that they're outlandish. But many of the perks that these companies offer really don't come with a cost. Certainly if you're going to provide people health care and on-site daycare and athletic gyms and those kinds of things, if you've got a large campus, which both of those companies do, that takes a cost. But once that cost is done, it keeps giving benefits to people. And what they've discovered is that by giving people these kinds of support, they free people's time up. So when they leave work, they've already been to the doctor if they need to, or if they've already had a workout. So they can go home and be with their families and rest and come back to work fresh. They're not feeling like they've got to go to the store and grab dinner and go home and do kinds of things that take up a lot of their time, where people feel overwhelmed, which is what a lot of people feel. So that caring orientation is really the basis of what SAS did. And they're one of the most generous companies, but they're generous not just in terms of what they do to support their people, as I described, but they're generous in terms of how they really interrelate on a management to employee basis. And they've got like ridiculously low turnover. It's like 2% a year. They have 100 people apply for every position. And this is a company that's had 38 years of consecutive record profitability. And one of the things that they did that was really interesting, and I think, just incredibly courageous, is during the Great Recession, all of their major competitors were laying off thousands of people, in some cases tens of thousands of people. And the employees there were freaking out and putting their resumes together and spending their time on LinkedIn. And the CEO sort of picked up a scent that there was something going on. So he said, "What's going on with people?" And they said, "Well, they're just waiting for you to let everybody go." So he had a conference call within the next few days all across the world with all of his employees, and he said there's two reasons for this call. Number one, no one's getting laid off. No one's getting laid off. Number two, I need you to watch our costs because the revenues aren't that high. They still had record profitability, and they've had major innovations because people feel so supported and that they matter so deeply to that organization and to that company, that the feelings of reciprocity are so profound that people are willing to do anything and everything they can for their boss and their organizations to succeed. We think people are expendable. But not only is it destructive to lay people off, and there may be times where you have to do that, but if you're thoughtful about building a business where you can try to avoid that or find alternative places for people and do things that make people feel that they're not interchangeable, those feelings translate into amazing engagement. And when we do it the opposite and people are laid off, it's not only destructive to the people who are leaving, but everybody else there thinks they're the next ones. And so they're hiding under their desk and they're afraid to commit themselves. And they're also saying, why should I do more for these people simply because they're not willing to do much for me? That feeling of value is really essential to organizations.
So, Mark, when you think of organizations that are starting to make this kind of shift, it's definitely a culture shift, and the leaders really have to be given permission to start changing their leadership style, to be given the time to do that, given the space, allowed to be a bit more vulnerable. How do you think an organization would be the best approach to start to make this kind of culture shift?
It's interesting because I'm seeing everything, and I've been getting a lot of solicitations from different companies to write articles, and a lot of them have to do with monitoring, taking pulses of employees and constant surveys, and that's good. But at the same time, what we really need to do is to say that the rules have changed. The way that we have traditionally managed people is not just not working, it's failing. When you only have 48% of the working population that expresses job satisfaction and 30% of the working population that say that they're engaged, we have a problem. So there's no question it's not working. But why it's not working is because we've put many of the wrong people into management jobs. People that don't have the skills that I'm talking about. People that can't really relate well with people. That don't have an orientation to care and support the well-being and growth of other people. Somebody who has, really thrives in seeing other people's success, where it's about others, not just about themselves. And so I think that would be the first step that I would recommend for companies, is to really rethink from this day forward. Who are you putting into jobs? Who are you putting into these management roles at every level of the organization? And if you can't be convinced that they care deeply about other people, then you should not put them into management roles. I would start there. I would absolutely start there.
Yeah, that makes lots of sense. And then also, if the organization's saying this is the shift that needs to happen, it needs to start from the top and go all the way down and cascade down as well, right?
Well, I think it also does is it telegraphs to the rest of the people that we now have these new values that are going to be rewarded, and that will shift the whole company. Because if you want to progress in your career, you're going to have to demonstrate that you have those values.
Yeah, and I love that point too, right? Is how are they going to be rewarded and compensated and incented to actually do that, right? So if that starts to change a little bit and what they're targeted on and what they're bonused on, then it's also going to sometimes create a shift that they would have not necessarily naturally wanted to do, but really make them take it seriously.
Well, it's a very good point, a really important point, because you may have, let's say you have a top salesperson, somebody that just kills it every month, every year. They're the top person. They get up on stage, they go on trips, they earn the most. And so from a company standpoint, we say, wow, Kristen is our greatest salesperson, and we don't want to lose Kristen, so we need to make her a manager. Well, the skills that it would take a top salesperson to be the top salesperson tend to be very different than the skills that are needed to be a really great manager. So in sales, you tend to be very self-focused. You're not very team-oriented. You're certainly not focused on what other people are doing. You're almost competing against them. You want a lot of recognition for yourself. All of those are inconsistent with what we want from managers. We want people that want to see other people get the recognition. We want managers who will develop and encourage and share everything they know and not be threatened by the success of other people. So we take that top salesperson, we put them into a management role, and now you've got this huge conflict. And we only did it because we thought that was the only way to keep that person. And we need to be clever in coming up with different paths to say, you are so great in this role that we want to do as much as we can to make you continue to succeed here and to feel no less valued than you would if you were a manager, so that we can keep you in this role and not put you into a role that you're not ideally suited.
Yeah, and that's something that we see all the time with our clients, that whole thing where you've got this top performer who's an individual contributor and does really, really well. And from their standpoint, the only thing they can see in terms of career path and advancement is to go into a leadership role. But really, that's not what they want, but they don't see any other option. Maybe they really like the organization, they love the culture, they want to continue working there. So I think as organizations start to progress, they really need to be a lot more creative around thinking other ways that you can still have movements within the organization, whether it's being in a different area of the organization, you know, having cross training and getting an opportunity to be challenged in different ways. But that challenge in different ways doesn't necessarily need to be about people challenge and starting to lead individuals, right? That might not be the right skill set.
Absolutely. Great summary.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we could talk for hours because I think the work you're doing is really, really important. And I think our audience is going to learn a lot from this conversation, and looking forward to continuing on Twitter now. So we're going to spend another 30 minutes and we're going to have 4 or 5 questions to put out there. And Mark has generously agreed to continue and be part of this conversation on Twitter, and looking forward to continuing the dialogue there. Thank you so much for your time today, Mark.
Thank you, Kristen. I love Twitter, so I can't wait for the next part.
Sounds good. See you guys there.
Bye-bye.